The salesman laughed. Not quietly, not under his breath. He laughed loud enough for the other customers to hear, loud enough for his colleague at the next desk to look up and smirk, loud enough for the sound to follow a man and his 7-year-old son all the way to the door of Prestige Motor Group on a warm Saturday afternoon in late September. The man's name was Darius Cole. He was wearing a plain navy t-shirt, dark work pants, and a pair of clean but unremarkable sneakers. He had driven 40 minutes to get here in a used pickup truck that he kept in good condition because he believed in taking care of things. He was holding his son's hand when the salesman laughed, and he felt the boy's fingers tighten around his in the way children's fingers tighten when they understand something has happened but don't yet have the words for what it was. Darius did not stop walking. He did not turn around. He pushed through the glass door and stepped out into the afternoon sun and stood there for a moment on the sidewalk with his son beside him, looking at nothing in particular. His son, Caleb, was 7 years old, with his father's steady eyes and his mother's stubborn mouth, and he looked up at his father now with the expression of a child waiting to be told what something meant. Darius looked down at him. He kept his voice even, the way he always kept his voice even in moments that wanted to pull it somewhere else. "We're going to get some lunch," he said. "Then we're going to come back." Caleb looked at him for a long moment, making the quiet assessment that 7-year-olds made when they were deciding whether to believe something. Then he nodded once, satisfied, and reached for his father's hand again as they walked down the sidewalk toward the corner. Inside the showroom, the salesman, whose name tag read Kyle, leaned back in his chair and said something to his colleague that made them both laugh again. Neither of them had any idea that the man who had just walked out the door owned 43% of the company that owned this dealership. Neither of them knew that Darius Cole had built his first business at 22 with $1,100 and a second-hand laptop, or that he had sold it at 29 for a number that still surprised him sometimes when he thought about it. Neither of them knew that he had spent the past 4 years quietly acquiring stakes in businesses across the city, that his portfolio included a logistics company, 2 commercial real estate holdings, a regional distribution operation, and a minority position in a hospitality group that was currently expanding into 3 new markets. Neither of them knew any of this because Darius Cole did not advertise it. He had learned early that the most dangerous thing a person could do was let the size of what they had built become the first thing anyone knew about them. He had watched too many people spend their success performing their success, and he had made a private decision a long time ago that he would not become that. He wore what was comfortable. He drove what was reliable. He showed up for his son's Saturday routines without calling ahead to make sure someone would recognize him. He also visited his investments unannounced, dressed exactly as he was dressed now, because his father had told him once that the truest version of a business was the version it showed to people it thought didn't matter. The morning had started the way it always started, Caleb's feet hitting the floor at 6:45, the specific series of sounds that meant a 7-year-old was moving through a space with total disregard for the concept of quiet. The smell of the coffee Darius had started the night before on a timer, because mornings were easier when some things were already handled. They had a system, the 2 of them. Saturdays belonged to Caleb, which meant Darius went where the boy led, within reason, and tried not to look at his phone more than necessary. This particular Saturday, Caleb had decided he wanted to see the cars. He had been talking about it for 2 weeks, ever since they had driven past Prestige Motor Group on the way to a hardware store, and Caleb had pressed his face against the window of the truck and stared at a silver convertible with the reverent attention of someone encountering something they did not yet have vocabulary to fully describe. "That one," Caleb had said. Then, a beat later, "Can we look at it?" Darius had said yes, the way he said yes to most things Caleb asked about, because Caleb did not ask for much, and because the years went fast in a way Darius had not been prepared for. So they drove over, parked the truck in the lot, walked in through the glass doors of the most prominent luxury dealership in the city, on a Saturday morning when the showroom was bright and clean and full of cars that smelled like ambition. The floor had 8 vehicles on display, A dark blue coupe near the entrance, a white sedan with interior lighting that made it look like something from a film, a low silver sports car that Caleb spotted immediately and moved toward with an expression of absolute conviction. Darius followed, watching his son crouch down beside the front tire and study the wheel with the seriousness of a small engineer, and felt the particular warmth that came with watching a child want something with their whole self. He looked up at the price on the card displayed on the windshield. Then he looked around the showroom at the other customers being attended to and waited. Kyle appeared after approximately 4 minutes. He was in his mid-30s, with the careful grooming of someone who took the appearance of his job seriously, and he moved across the showroom floor with the particular gait of a man who had already decided certain things before he opened his mouth. He stopped a few feet from where Darius and Caleb were standing, and looked between them with an expression that had made itself into something neutral but was not quite neutral underneath. "Can I help you?" he said in the tone of someone asking a question they already knew the answer to. Darius straightened. "We're interested in the car," he said. "This one." He nodded toward the silver sports car Caleb was still studying. Kyle's eyes moved from Darius to Caleb and back to the car, following a route that took in the navy t-shirt and the work pants along the way. "This model," Kyle said, and the pause he put before the next word was just long enough to carry something, "starts at $214,000. He said it the way people said things when what they were really saying was something else entirely. Said it with a small upward inflection at the end that was designed to land in the space between them like a wall made of politeness. "I'm aware," Darius said. Kyle's expression adjusted. He clasped his hands in front of him. "The thing about this particular model," he said, "is that we have a waiting list, and it's quite involved. There's a qualification process." "A qualification process," Darius repeated. "For financing," Kyle said. "Standard practice at this level. I'm not looking to finance," Darius said. Something moved through Kyle's expression, too fast to fully identify, and he recovered from it smoothly. "Of course," Kyle said. "Even for cash purchases, we typically require some background. Our clientele tend to have established relationships with the dealership." He smiled, the smile of a man performing patience. "I'd recommend perhaps starting with one of our certified pre-owned options. We have some excellent vehicles at a more accessible price point. I'd be happy to show you." Darius looked at him for a long moment, not with anger and not with the particular kind of stiffened dignity that people reached for when they were embarrassed. He looked at Kyle with the steady, even attention of a man who was observing something and storing the information for later. Caleb had looked up from the car. He was watching the exchange with the clear-eyed focus of a 7-year-old who understood the texture of the moment even without understanding its full vocabulary. Darius put one hand briefly on his son's shoulder. Then he looked back at Kyle. "We'll think about it," he said. His voice was entirely calm. He steered Caleb gently toward the door, and they walked across the showroom floor in the specific silence of two people who had decided not to give a room the satisfaction of their reaction. Caleb walked beside his father with his shoulders pulled in slightly, in the way children pulled in when they were processing something that had made them feel small. They were almost at the door when Kyle said something to his colleague, low enough to be deniable but loud enough to carry, and the colleague laughed, and the laugh followed them out through the glass. On the sidewalk, Darius stood in the September sun and looked at his son and said the thing he had decided to say before the laugh had finished. "We're going to get some lunch. Then we're going to come back," and Caleb nodded. And they walked to the corner. What Darius did over the next 45 minutes was not dramatic. He ordered a grilled cheese for Caleb at the diner 2 blocks away and black coffee for himself and sat across from his son in a booth by the window and watched the boy eat with the absolute focused contentment that children brought to food they liked. He texted 2 people. He made 1 phone call that lasted 6 minutes. He looked out the window at the street and thought about his father, who had worked 2 jobs for 11 years and had still been turned away from a car lot when Darius was 9 years old, not for lack of money but for the shape of an assumption, and had driven home in silence while young Darius sat in the back seat, and learned something about the world that he had not yet had the language to resist. He thought about what he had done with that lesson, not with bitterness because his father had not given it to him with bitterness, but with clarity. The kind of clarity that could be turned into something if you were patient enough and honest enough and willing to work long enough in the direction of it. He had been all of those things, and the result was currently sitting across from him eating a grilled cheese and kicking his feet gently against the booth. He paid the check. He helped Caleb with his jacket. They walked back down the sidewalk toward Prestige Motor Group. When they came through the glass doors the second time, the showroom looked exactly as it had before. Same light, same cars, same arrangement of people in their positions. Kyle was at his desk, speaking to a man in a linen jacket. The third person in the room, however, was someone who had not been there before. He was standing near the reception desk in a charcoal suit. A man in his mid-50s with the build of someone who had once been an athlete and the posture of someone who had spent the decades since in rooms where decisions were made. His name was Franklin Okafor, and he was the regional director of operations for the Hartwell Automotive Group, which owned Prestige Motor Group, along with 11 other dealership locations across the region. He had received a call 40 minutes ago from a number he had not immediately recognized. He had recognized the voice immediately. He had been in his car and driving toward this building before the call ended. He saw Darius Cole walk through the door and cross the showroom floor in 12 steps. "Mr. Cole," he said and extended his hand. "I'm sorry I wasn't here when you arrived this morning." Kyle had looked up from his desk. The expression on his face moved through several stages in quick succession. The specific facial journey of a person who is being handed information that is restructuring something they thought was settled. Darius shook Franklin's hand. He kept his voice at its usual register, easy and unperformative. "Frank," he said, "good to see you." They had met 4 times in the past 18 months, always in contexts that involved paperwork and numbers and rooms that looked nothing like car showrooms. Franklin. Okafor knew exactly what Darius Cole's stake in the Hartwell Group meant and what kind of call this morning had been. Caleb was looking at Franklin with the open assessment of a child who categorized adults quickly. Franklin crouched down slightly and offered his hand to the boy. "You must be Caleb," he said. Caleb shook it with the formal seriousness of someone who had been taught that handshakes mattered. He looked up at his father to confirm the categorization. Darius gave the smallest nod. "I heard you're interested in the silver one," Franklin said, straightening. "The silver one," Caleb confirmed, pointing across the showroom with complete conviction. "Good taste," Franklin said. He meant it toward both of them. Kyle had gotten up from his desk. He was standing now at the edge of the conversation with his hands in a position that didn't quite know what to do with themselves, and his expression had settled into the particular configuration of a man who understood that he had made an error and was now calculating the dimensions of it. Franklin looked at him. The look was brief and entirely clear. "Why don't you take Caleb over and let him sit in the driver's seat?" Franklin said to Kyle. His voice was even, but the instruction was not a suggestion. Kyle moved. He walked across the showroom floor and crouched beside Caleb and said something that made the boy look at the car with renewed intensity. Caleb climbed up into the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel, and the expression of someone who had just been handed access to a version of the future. Franklin turned to Darius and kept his voice low. "Tell me what happened," he said. Darius told him. He kept it factual, without the emotional coloring that the facts didn't need, because the facts were already sufficient. The 4-minute wait, the price announcement as a deterrent, the qualification process framing, the pre-owned redirect, the laugh at the door. Franklin listened without interrupting. Something around his jaw tightened once and did not loosen until Darius finished. "I'm sorry," Franklin said, not as a formality, as a direct statement to a specific person about a specific thing. Darius nodded. "I know you are. What do you want to do?" Franklin asked. Darius thought about it. He looked across the showroom at Caleb, both hands on the wheel, making engine sounds from somewhere in the back of his throat. I want Caleb to remember today as the day he sat in the car, Darius said. Not as the day we got turned away. Franklin held his gaze. Then he nodded. That's what today is going to be, he said. What happened next happened without drama. Franklin walked Kyle to his office, not with a performance of authority, but with the quiet direction of a man who had made decisions like this before and saw no reason to make them louder than necessary. The conversation lasted 8 minutes. When it was over, Kyle did not return to the showroom floor. He went to get his things from his desk, and he left through the side entrance, and the sound of the door closing behind him was unremarkable. Darius watched none of this. He was at the silver sports car with Caleb, who had moved from the driver's seat to the passenger seat and was now examining the interior with the methodical thoroughness of a boy conducting an inspection. A saleswoman named Priya, who had been at the dealership for 3 years and had been watching the morning's events from a careful distance, approached them with genuine warmth rather than performed recovery. She introduced herself, asked Caleb what he thought of the car, and listened to his answer with real attention. Caleb told her it was the best car he had ever been inside. He did not mention it was also the only car he had ever been inside that wasn't the family truck, because that seemed beside the point. Priya walked them through the features with clean professionalism. She spoke to Caleb as much as to Darius, explaining things in terms a 7-year-old could follow without being condescending, and Darius noticed this and was grateful for it in the particular quiet way he was grateful for things. An hour later, they were sitting at Priya's desk. Caleb had a bottle of water and was drawing something on a notepad that appeared to be an engineering diagram of the silver sports car. Darius had a folder in front of him containing a purchase order, an insurance transfer document, and a registration form. He signed them and slid them back across the desk. Priya stood and shook Darius's hand, then Caleb's hand with equal seriousness, and said the car would be ready for pickup Thursday morning. Thursday, Caleb repeated, filing it. Thursday, Priya confirmed. They walked out of the dealership together, through the same glass doors they had walked out of hours earlier, except this time they did not stop on the sidewalk. They turned toward the truck and walked through the September afternoon with their hands linked. Caleb was quiet for half a block. Then, that guy who laughed at us, he's not there anymore. It wasn't a question. He had seen things without appearing to see them, the way children often did. No, Darius said. He's not. Caleb processed this. You made that happen? Darius considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Not by myself, he said. Some things happen because of choices you made a long time ago. You don't always see the connection until later. Caleb looked at this from several angles, tucked it away, and said nothing further. Darius had learned that his son processed things slowly and then completely, and that what got tucked away came back later in forms more sophisticated than the original question. They got in the truck. Darius started the engine. The truck started without ceremony, as it always did, because he kept it maintained. Franklin Okafor called at 7 that evening. Darius took the call on the back porch while Caleb was in the bath. I wanted you to know, Franklin said. What happened today has been documented. There will be a full review of customer experience protocols across all locations. What you experienced is not what this company is supposed to be. I know it's not, Darius said. That's why I'm still involved with it. There was a pause on the line. Then Franklin said, I appreciate that more than I can say. After the call, Darius stood on the porch for a few minutes. The city was settling into its Saturday night rhythm. Somewhere inside, Caleb was narrating something to himself in the bath, the specific running commentary that meant he was in a good place. Darius thought about Thursday. The look on Caleb's face when they pulled up in the silver car. The specific kind of memory that a day could become if you were willing to hold the line long enough for it to get there. He had been willing to hold the line. He had been willing since he was 9 years old in the back seat of his father's car, learning something he had not yet known what to do with. He knew now. He went back inside to finish making dinner. Thursday morning arrived clear and cool. Caleb was tracking the countdown with the specific intensity of a child for whom time moved frustratingly at its own speed, regardless of how much attention he paid to it. At 7:15, they were in the truck. Caleb was wearing his good jacket, the navy one he reserved for occasions he had privately classified as significant. Priya was there when they arrived. She had been there since 7, which was not when her shift started, because some things warranted being early. She had the paperwork ready and the car detailed and the keys in an envelope with Caleb's name written on it in careful handwriting. She handed the envelope to Caleb. He opened it with both hands and looked at the key inside with an expression that needed no translation. They walked out to the lot where the silver sports car was parked in the morning light, and Caleb walked around it once slowly, examining it from all sides, and then he looked up at his father and said none of the 6 things his expression was holding. Darius crouched down beside him. "It's ours," he said simply. Caleb looked at the car for a long moment, then at his father. Then he said the thing he had apparently been working on since the previous Saturday. "The man who laughed at us," Caleb said carefully. "He didn't know who you were." "No," Darius said. "He didn't. But it didn't matter," Caleb said. "What you were is what you were." Whether he knew or not, Darius looked at his son. He felt the specific quality of being seen clearly by someone who loved you without complication. 7 years old, and already understanding the thing that had taken Darius most of his adult life to fully internalize. "That's right," he said. "That's exactly right," Caleb nodded. "Filed it? Done." Then he looked at the car and said, "Can I hold the key?" Darius handed it over. Caleb held it with both hands, looking at it with the reverence he brought to things that mattered. Then he looked up at the morning sky and back at his father and smiled the way children smiled when something was exactly what they had hoped it would be. Darius put his hand on his son's shoulder, light and steady, the way he always did. They stood together in the morning light beside the silver car, and nothing about that moment required anything further. Some things are built slowly, across years, across silence, across rooms that tried to tell you the answer before you had finished asking the question. Some things are built the way water cuts through stone, not by force but by return, by the steady, faithful fact of showing up again. Darius Cole had learned this from his father, who had not been able to give him the car or the dealership or the portfolio, but had given him the only thing that made any of those things possible: the knowledge that what you were was what you were, whether anyone else knew it or not. He squeezed his son's shoulder once. They got in the car, and Darius Cole drove his son home through streets that were beginning to fill with the ordinary life of an ordinary. Thursday morning, in a silver car that was going to be unremarkable to everyone they passed, in the way that the most important things so often were.